Indiana, often called the crossroads of America, holds more than just cornfields and interstate highways. Beneath its green countryside and quiet valleys lie traces of towns that once thrived, only to gradually disappear from the map. From Sloan, erased by military development, to Elkinsville, drowned for a dam project, each of these towns carries its own story of ambition, disaster, and forgetting. 15 names, 15 silent tales from the heart of Indiana that once beat as proudly as any city in the Midwest. Now, let's explore them one by one. Ghosts of the past that whisper among fields, forests, and a time that no longer looks back. The small town of Sloan in Warren County, Indiana, was once a living community born out of the railroad. In 1903, the New York Central Railroad completed a line through Jordan Township, opening the door for new settlements to rise along the tracks. The name Sloan came from a local family living in the area, and the town's official post office was established on June 18, 1914, right next to the railway. But that ambition slowly faded. The post office closed on November 29, 1941, and the railroad, the town's lifeline, eventually ceased operations in the 1990s. Today, nothing remains of Sloan, just open farmland and a fading mark on the map to show that a town once stood there. Kramer once symbolized Indiana's early 20th century ambition, not as a place for labor, but for healing. It was home to Hotel Mudlavia, a luxury resort built in 1885 by entrepreneur Harry L. Kramer. The natural mineral springs in the area were believed to cure ailments like rheumatism and nervous disorders, drawing guests from far beyond state lines. The Grand Hotel stood deep within the forests of Warren County, with classic architecture and, for its time, futuristic amenities. But its glory didn't last. A fire destroyed the main building in 1920. Though it was rebuilt and later served as a nursing home, another fire consumed it again in 1968. All that remains now are old stone foundations and whispered legends among locals. Brisco, a tiny name on the map, but one with a quietly deep story. Located in Pine Township, Warren County, Indiana, Brisco began forming in the 1850s. One of its first signs of life, a one-room schoolhouse, opened in 1856 and remained in use until 1929. After the school closed, the building was repurposed into a general store during the 1930s, operated by Jim Marquis for over 50 years. Yet, over time, Brisco began to fade. Rail lines and trade routes that had once sustained small Indiana towns no longer passed through, and people started to leave. Today, almost nothing remains, except a cemetery northeast of the original site, quietly keeping the name Brisco alive among the fields and trees. Though gone, Brisco still appears in the U.S. Geographic Names database, a place that once was, even if it's absent from most modern maps. A small Indiana town that's now nearly silent, but once thrived with the rhythm of industry and river life. Hartford took shape in the early 1800s along the banks of Lafayette Creek, and at its peak, it was home to 4 sawmills and grist mills humming along the water. The town also served as a stopover for flatboats carrying corn, flour, timber, and stone downstream. But then came a turning point. The Great Flood of 1937 destroyed the last remaining mill, taking with it one of the town's economic lifelines. Over time, the population dwindled to a mere handful. Today, Hartford is home to maybe 20 people or even fewer. A quiet dot on the map in Prairie Township, Warren County, Indiana, once inhabited, now more fields than memories. In 1913, its population was already listed as under 100. Its exact spot, at the intersection of County Road 850 North and 600 West, sitting atop a low hill now surrounded by open farmland. All that remains today is a church, Locust Grove Church, an old cemetery, Locust Grove Cemetery, and a few scattered homes. The rest has been lost to time. One curious fact: the cemetery is tied to a local ghost story. Legends say you can hear the march of soldiers from the Battle of Tippecanoe echoing through the grounds. Not a bustling city, but a once living point on the map now nearly erased. Founded in 1827 by Isaac Shelby in Shelby Township, Tippecanoe County, this small town was named after the ancestral home of Marquis de Lafayette in France. LaGrange was laid out with 8 streets and even had a hotel, all signs of hope for a riverfront town poised to grow along trade routes. But fate had other plans. As river trade declined and the Wabash Railroad was constructed on the opposite side of the river, LaGrange lost its geographic advantage and, slowly, its pulse. Today, it stands as a clear example of how shifts in transportation and trade routes can quietly erase a once hopeful community. Monument City. This town's story is nothing short of dramatic. It all began when residents of Polk Township in Huntington County erected a monument in 1869 to honor 27 men who died in the American Civil War. Years later, near that very monument, they laid out a new community, Monument City, officially platted in 1876. It once had a sawmill, a general store, and played a modest role in the local economy. But fate shifted when a flood control project on the Salamone River was launched, leading to the construction of Salamone Lake, which ultimately submerged the entire town in the mid-1960s. In an eerie twist, during the severe drought of 2012, the reservoir's water receded far enough to reveal remnants of the town. Old foundations, faded roads, and traces of a once living community, a kind of underwater city that occasionally resurfaces. This one is a story that's as emotional as it is historical. Elkinsville was established in Brown County, Indiana, either within or just on the edge of the Hoosier National Forest, sometime in the mid-19th century by a pioneer named William Elkins. It thrived as a small farming and logging village where people worked the land and traded goods in the forest. Everything changed in the 1960s. When the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers began building Lake Monroe on Salt Creek as part of a flood control and water management project. Much of Elkinsville was condemned and residents were forced to relocate under eminent domain. The twist? The elevation estimates were off. Most of the town's land ended up above the water line and never actually flooded. But by then, the town was already gone. A small community in Guthrie Township, Lawrence County, Indiana, once full of promise, now more quiet than bustling. It was platted in 1857 and named in honor of Michael Ritner, a railroad foreman who supervised the construction of a major tunnel nearby. At its peak in the early 20th century, Fort Ritner had as many as 1,000 residents, with a train depot, 2 saloons, a flour mill, a blacksmith, and even a hotel. But its proximity to the East Fork of the White River proved to be a curse. Devastating floods in 1913 and 1937 inflicted major damage, leading many residents to relocate elsewhere. Today, only a few dozen homes remain, and much of the town's economic life has long since faded away. A place built on railroads, long tunnels, and quiet tales that still cling to the land. Founded in 1859 in Guthrie Township, Lawrence County, the name Tunnelton was born from the presence of 2 massive railroad tunnels carved through the hills nearby, the Big Tunnel and the Little Tunnel. The larger of the two, known simply as the Big Tunnel, was completed around 1857 and stretches approximately 1,731 feet. For a while, Tunnelton thrived as a railway workers' camp, with hotels, a school, and a post office springing up alongside the tracks. But instead of evolving into a bustling city, Tunnelton slowly drifted into stagnation. Though the rail line remained active, the heart of local life shifted elsewhere, and many buildings were gradually abandoned. Today, its population is small, and its focus has shifted from growth to preserving echoes of its past. Once a small community in Dearborn County, Indiana, Weisburg today is little more than a name on a map and a few barely visible foundations. This town once sat along the Cincinnati, Indianapolis, and Western Railroad and found modest prosperity in the late 1800s thanks to its small station, which served as a distribution point for local timber and agricultural goods. But when the railroad shut down in the mid-20th century, Weisburg's economic lifeline vanished. People moved away, shops closed their doors, and homes were left to decay and disappear into the brush. Today, only St. John's Catholic Church, perched on a quiet hillside, remains, the last standing witness to the days when Weisburg was still alive and moving. Bonnell was once a quiet riverside village in Dearborn County, Indiana, nestled along the gentle bends of the Whitewater River. In the late 1800s, Bonnell served as a small but important stop for trade boats and local rail lines that connected the rural countryside to larger industrial towns nearby. Back then, the river and the rail were lifelines for Bonnell's livelihood. But like many river towns in Indiana, Bonnell's fate changed when modern highways replaced river routes and railroads as the dominant form of transport. Port activity ceased, the local station shut down, and the town slowly faded. Today, only a handful of homes remain, and one lasting landmark. The Bonnell Bridge, built in the 1890s, still stands tall over the water. No longer busy with traffic, it's now a quiet destination for photographers and history seekers who come to witness what remains of a past life on the riverbanks. once a small community tucked into the hills of Sparta Township in Dearborn County, Indiana, Bear Branch grew slowly among farmlands and woodlands, where life moved at a gentle, predictable pace. The town's name came from the nearby creek, Bear Branch, reportedly named by early hunters who often spotted black bears roaming the area. By the late 1800s, Bear Branch had its own school, post office, and church, all serving as the heart of community life. But over time, the population steadily declined. Young people moved away to bigger cities, and traditional farming could no longer sustain the town. The post office closed in the early 20th century, signaling the end of Bear Branch's active days. Today, all that remains are rolling green hills and a few aging homes, standing quietly as reminders of a rural past. Located in Wayne County, Milton isn't entirely a ghost town, but its heyday is long gone. Founded in 1824, the town once thrived as a milling and trade center, thanks to its strategic location along the Whitewater River. By the late 1800s, Milton had flour mills, shops, and even a busy train station serving the Cincinnati and Indianapolis line. But disaster struck. A series of devastating fires between the 1880s and 1909 destroyed much of the town's business district. Milton never fully recovered. Many residents left for nearby cities like Richmond or Connorsville, and vacant buildings were left behind. Today, one of Milton's most enduring landmarks is the Milton Bridge, built in 1881 over the Whitewater River, a favorite subject for photographers, and one of the last standing symbols of a town that time nearly erased. Situated in White County near the shores of Lake Schaefer, Buffalo was once a modest but lively stopover for travelers heading to the Indiana Beach resort area. Founded in the 1830s, the town originally flourished through timber and agricultural trade, with the nearby Tippecanoe River serving as a major transportation route long before the railroads came. But as rail lines were redirected and agriculture centralized in larger towns, Buffalo slowly slipped into stillness. Shops shuttered, families moved away, and what was once a bustling stop became a quiet lakeside community. Today, Buffalo is best known for its peaceful atmosphere and charming old homes, the kind that holds stories in every porch swing and creaky floorboard, even if no one's around to tell them.